Well, it turns out genocide has consequences. I was wrong, and the Democrats have lost. Kamala Harris has lost the election. She has not only lost to Donald Trump, she has given Donald Trump something that he's never had before, like a mandate. I believe back in 2016, he did briefly have control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency, but he did not have a popular vote win. Now he has that to point to. So the end result of Joe Biden being picked as the Democratic nominee in 2020 was an emboldened and empowered Donald Trump in full control of the U.S. federal government. Now, as much as I would love to believe that this horrifyingly bad result for the Democrats, this victory of Trump, is the result of an electorate recoiling in horror from the genocide that we're carrying out in Gaza, I know that's not true. The U.S. voting public simply doesn't care that much. I'm not saying the U.S. public doesn't care about the fact that our money is being used to commit a genocide, but they don't care enough to hand this much of a victory to Donald Trump. So today I'd like to talk at a little more length about how it was that Biden and Kamala, but mostly Joe Biden, managed to fail so entirely. I think it's important to realize that it isn't some like sole source thing. It's a whole bunch of things. There are a lot of really easy explanations that I think that we can discard right at the beginning. It was not just the genocide in Gaza. It was not really at all these two other explanations that I think are really popular right now that I've been seeing a lot of. One of them is that, well, you know, in this environment, the way that the world is in post-COVID, it's just impossible for incumbents to win. Look, they're losing everywhere. Another linked thing that people are saying is like, well, this is just sexism, and specifically it's Latino sexism. The massive Latino vote that is shifted from the Democrats to Donald Trump, that is, you know, they're a bunch of, you know, sexist voters who are with machismo, who just naturally wouldn't vote for women. Well, then, of course, how do you explain Claudia Sheinbaum, the new president of Mexico, who was running as part of an incumbent party? She is a successor to the people who have been in charge in Mexico for years now. So she's an incumbent, and she's a woman voted for exclusively by Latino voters. So those are two explanations that we can quickly discard. I thought it might be useful today to go through a video that I made in March of 2021, at the very beginning, the outset of the Joe Biden presidential administration, which was a series of recommendations on how he could stop exactly what just happened, how he could stop Trump 2024, which I acknowledged is a very real risk even in March of 2021. Let's take a look at, let's roll that tape, and then we'll jump in with commentary as we move along. Hey there. As we survey the damage and struggle to emerge from 4 years of Trump, one question should be on our minds above all others. How do we make sure this never happens again? Donald Trump could very well run for president again in 2024, and if nothing changes significantly about the U.S. political scene, he could very well win. So how can Joe Biden stop the next Donald Trump presidency? Today, I'm going to propose 3 possible strategies. Donald Trump made a powerful appeal to those who felt left behind by our whiz-bang financial, technological, and primarily coastal economy. Over the past 40 years, we have intentionally crafted a system where the winners do better and better, and most people do worse and worse. There were arguably good reasons to do this at the time. In the 1970s, it's conceivable that the country was too equal to innovate the way it needed to. It might have made sense to give the wealthy a few more incentives to invest and come up with new stuff. Wherever the right balance was, we hit it at some point before 2008, and we have kept on accelerating in the same direction long past the point of diminishing returns. Donald Trump was elected on a promise to do more for the little guy, but all he ended up delivering was a massive tax cut that made the rich even richer. A lot of folks are already impressed with Joe Biden's moves in this direction. The new stimulus apparently included some pretty impressive new anti-poverty measures, and it seems like the Democratic Congress and the Wall Street figures that own it are a lot less obsessed with the pro-austerity balanced budget mindset than the Obama administration was. There are a lot of quick and easy things that could be done here, like enforce the labor legislation that's already on the books, or give the IRS the money it needs to enforce tax legislation. And there's some bigger picture stuff too, like, fixing our horrific healthcare system or doing some ongoing stimulus through much needed infrastructure spending. I am much more optimistic about the chances for this strategy than I was back in November. So, did Joe Biden end up taking measures to try to fix inequality? Did he try to improve the lot in life of people lowest on the economic totem pole in the United States? The answer is actually yes. Yes, he did. He did a lot of really interesting and positive things. But I would argue he didn't do enough. And the way that stimulus funding worked during COVID actually ended up putting him in a position where he looked like he took away things from poor people that Donald Trump had given them. At this point in the sort of post-election, essentially circular firing squad where everybody's trying to blame everybody else, I think you're getting a lot of sort of neoliberal types, pro-business types in the Democratic Party being like, look, he tried deliverism. He tried to bring benefits to poor people and it didn't work. Trump won anyway. We should stop doing this entirely and basically go back to being Republican light. And I think that's a really deep misunderstanding of what actually happened here. Let's take a look at that list that I proposed. Fully staff and fund the Department of Labor and National Labor Relations Board. He made progress towards that. Enforce existing labor laws and encourage unions. I think it's debatable how far he went in that direction, but he did those things. Fully staff and fund the Internal Revenue Service. He did that. I celebrated that on this channel. Go back to auditing rich people instead of just poor people. Yes, that's in part why so many billionaires were willing to funnel so much money to Donald Trump, a guy that they had openly hated. Fix healthcare. That absolutely didn't happen. Fix crumbling infrastructure. That surprisingly did happen. The money was allotted for this. They failed to get through some really important other details, permitting reform, making it easier to actually build things. But the money for infrastructure has been provided and things are being built. Improve housing and education access. Build more of both. That did not happen. So the really big ticket items, healthcare, housing, education, they just really didn't do much. On education specifically, and I think this is a really, really key point for those sort of pro-business people in the Democratic Party who are arguing that, Biden really did everything that was possible. He really didn't. Joe Biden promised when he was running for election that he would forgive student debt. He promised that he would do this early on in his administration. And some people's debt did get forgiven. Some people's debt, books were wiped clean. But this is a sort of uniquely malign thing that the United States does to its young people. I have friends who have been paying off their student debts for 20 years and now owe more 20 years later than they had initially borrowed. Like, it's a deeply, deeply sick system. Joe Biden promised that he would do away with it, that he would forgive these debts, and he did not. And it's even worse than that because Donald Trump, under the Trump presidency, as a COVID stimulus measure, people were no longer required to pay their student debt payments. They were put on a pause. And it was during the Biden administration that pause went away. So essentially, Joe Biden, the guy who promised to get rid of student debt payments, brought them back. And the timing here is extraordinary. The debt payments were scheduled to restart in the fall of 2023, September 2023. But there was an on-ramp. There was an acknowledgement that, oh, this is difficult. If you can't make your payments, you're still going to be owing us these payments, but we're not going to nuke your credit report. We're going to make it easier for you that you can sort of ease back into making these payments. Do you know when the on-ramp ended? The on-ramp ended in the fall of 2024. So essentially, if you're wondering where a significant portion of the young person vote for the Democrats went, it is people who didn't have to pay their student debt payments from 2020 until the fall of 2024. How excited can you expect a person to be to go vote for the Democrats when the Democrats have brought back the student debt payments that you didn't have to pay, that Trump, took away? You can also see this with the child tax credit. The child tax credit is money that is given to parents. A very good sort of pro-nativist policy. So it's good for the conservatives and for the progressives, right? Well, the child tax credit money went up under Trump, and then briefly with Joe Biden, with his stimulus package in 2021, for a single year, it went up dramatically. And then it went away. Now, of course, you can say, well, this is the Republicans' fault, or this is Joe Manchin's fault, famous pro-business, anti-social program Democrats like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. But the fact is that this happened under Joe Biden. Joe Biden was the person in charge when massive, generous, useful benefits, like not having to pay your student debt payments, or money to help you raise your children. Joe Biden was in charge when these benefits were stripped away. So it's not like the message here is the American public being like, we don't care about benefits that you give us. We're just going to vote on, something else. No, the message is Joe Biden was punished for giving things and then ripping them away, and ripping things away that were given under the massive Donald Trump stimulus in 2020. So it's like, it is true that there were amazing things that the Biden administration did. Lena Khan at the Federal Trade Commission, beginning to look at actually breaking up some of these monopolies that charge us too much for everything and every aspect of our lives. My understanding is that there were some really good changes that were made around some Medicare stuff, some drug stuff, tremendously complicated, and infuriatingly, like, not benefits that are actually going to happen or accrue before the election. So Donald Trump's going to be able to take credit for them. I guess let's just move further on. Back in 2021, I suggested that Biden should do things about inequality, but I acknowledged that it was unlikely to really give him the push that he needed to stop Donald Trump because of the difficulty of working on inequality, some of which I've just talked about. But there's a lot of difficult and long-term work to be done on this issue. And as the Trump crises fade, people are going to get a lot less willing to do that work. And even if Joe Biden proves to be an effective fighter against inequality, positive results might not even show up in time to win the election for the Democrats in 2024. It's obvious that Joe Biden is not going to solve racism. Racial tensions are as American as apple pie, and they are eternal. But they can be changed by a president. Donald Trump just provided a masterclass in making racial tensions worse over the past 4 years. Interestingly, the best way to improve things with this issue would actually also be to work to solve inequality. The fact that I think these two concepts are directly linked may be surprising to those of you familiar with Twitter wars over which concept is more important to the rise of Trump. Many in the U.S.'s right-wing marketing segmentation like the inequality explanation, while many in the left-wing marketing segmentation like the racism explanation. But for those of us who think of politics as more than just a team sport, It's obvious that these two issues are directly linked and feed off of each other. If life gets worse, as it has for like 80% of Americans over the past 40 years, it becomes more attractive to hate the other, whether that's on a racial, ethnic, or even a gender basis. And that's exactly what's been happening. Donald Trump's genius, to the extent that he had it, was his ability to ball all these resentments into real power at the ballot box. As I said, early progress on inequality has been better than I expected, and perhaps that'll feed back into positive developments on race relations as well. I hope it does. Unfortunately, I think it's more likely that the COVID-related spike in violent crime will lead to a return to the racist politics of mass incarceration that seemed so dead in the water just 2 years ago. Well, I was certainly right about that. This is pretty depressing, not gonna lie. I'm also getting a little irritated by the way that we're expected to be so excited that our war machine and our financial apparatus is now controlled by more diverse and female executives. Like, wasn't it diverse and woke and fun the way we killed all those anti-ISIS militia members in Syria a couple weeks back? Yay. The truth is that both inequality and racism are tremendously difficult problems that Biden and every president that comes after him are going to have to work to solve. If I were Biden, with his tiny congressional majority and his desperate need to hold on to the popularity he has and somehow get more, I would look for the easiest, lowest hanging fruit. And that's what the rest of this video and the upcoming videos over the next few weeks are going to be about. The easiest, lowest cost way that Joe Biden can do an end run around Donald Trump and steal one of his most popular issues. If Joe Biden can make serious strides in this very popular, morally right, and fiscally responsible direction, there's a distinct chance that he could sweep the midterms, allowing him to make even more progress on racism and inequality. Ending the forever wars, or at least seriously dialing them back, would also rob the Donald Trumps and Tucker Carlsons of this world of their very best issue. It is a no-brainer, but it doesn't seem to have been a priority in the first months of the Biden administration. The problem is that a number of foreign policy hawks have managed to convince high-level Democratic and media figures that Donald Trump was somehow a foreign plot and that aggressive pushing of that idea was key to his defeat. This couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, as I've been saying for years, aggressive U.S. foreign policy and the people who make it are one of the main reasons we got Donald Trump in the first place. Every night, we see people like Robert Mueller, James Comey, James Clapper, David Frum, Max Boot, and a wide cast of intelligence community freak shows and war on terror propagandists lionized by people on CNN and MSNBC who should really know better. All these frickin' resistance neocons are the reason Donald Trump is president. For 15 years after 9/11, they lined their pockets with war on terror nonsense. To do this, they created fear. Fear of Muslims, fear of foreign countries, fear about our borders, fear of the disappearing crime in U.S. cities. Donald Trump is the result of their failures and the fear that they have created.
In my opinion, we've spent $4 trillion trying to topple various people that, frankly, if they were there and if we could have spent that $4 trillion in the United States to fix our roads, our bridges, and all of the other problems, our airports, and all of the other problems we have, we would have been a lot better off. I can tell you that right now. We have done a tremendous disservice, not only to the Middle East, we've done a tremendous disservice to humanity. The people that have been killed, the people that have been wiped away, and for what? It's not like we had victory. It's a mess. The Middle East is totally destabilized, a total and complete mess.
Trump was exactly right about that. If he was actually the whip-smart executive he played on TV, then maybe he would have been able to make some real progress on these issues. But he's not. What the national security state pulled off while Trump was in power is extraordinary. They used Trump to heighten tensions all over the world, but they also managed to convince the Democrats that those heightened tensions were necessary to defeat Trump, and they should continue now that he is gone. These foreign policy professionals have somehow managed to rig the game so that defense budgets and weapons sales go up no matter who is in power. And to make it all worse, it's all a complete waste of time and money that hurts the U.S. national interest. In January of 2018, U.S. policy changed dramatically. Since 2001, the main foreign policy priority of the United States had supposedly been fighting terrorism. I have a 40-plus video series called Everybody's Lying About Islam on how useless that effort has been, but at least it was something the American people thought they wanted. With January 2018's new defense strategy, the Pentagon quietly announced a shift to great power competition against countries like Russia and China. This seismic shift went largely unexamined because we were all too busy watching the President Trump show. If anything, our competition with China is even more farcical, as I've covered recently. I'll talk more about our absurd conflict with Iran in the coming weeks. The problem with all of this is that it's mostly meaningless until it isn't. Obama let a bunch of foreign policy hawks convince him to do stupid things in Syria and Libya, which led directly to a massive European refugee crisis and the foundation of the Islamic State. It's easy to forget now that we are all moving on to China panic, but the very cable news-friendly threat of the Islamic State and Trump's catering to it with a Muslim ban were a big part of his victory. Trump won by the difference of a few tens of thousands of votes in just 3 states. If it weren't for the catastrophes brought to us by the foreign policy blob, Donald Trump would have never been president. And if it weren't for the foreign policy catastrophes of the Biden administration, then Donald Trump would never have been reelected president. Again, I wish it was rage at the Gaza genocide that we are perpetrating at this moment that turned the U.S. public against Biden. But I'm not the first person to say that. Actually, no, it's not that. What it is the sense of chaos, the sense of destruction, the sense of the United States and the world sort of spinning off of its axis. So it's not just Gaza, it's Ukraine, I mean, for the love of God, I guess nobody really thinks about this, but like Sudan and Ethiopia are 2 very large countries with very large strategic importance that are like descending into a horrific civil wars right now. In the world before, the United States was managing and funding 2 large horrific wars in Europe and in the Middle East at the same time, which is what the Biden administration has given us, we would have paid a little more attention to Sudan and Ethiopia. There would have been media attention, diplomatic attention, U.S. government attention, U.S. government aid attention, U.S. Shaming and naming and shaming of the Sudanese and Ethiopian folks that were in charge of these things, turning them into pariahs. All of that energy has been expended on Israel and Ukraine. So, like, when the Trump administration says, wow, when the Trump campaign says, wow, look, the world under Biden is a mess, he's not wrong. This was a really simple choice, as I think I've outlined with this extensive set of clips here. It was obvious in 2021 that the Biden administration had to run screaming from these neocon hawks that had destroyed, in large part, the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and the Trump administration. There were no wars that ended during the Trump administration because of these neocon hawks. And instead of learning from that, instead of moving on from that, Kamala Harris spent the last weeks of her campaign running around the country with Liz Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney, George W. Bush's monstrous vice president, who was sort of seen as even more than George W. Bush, like the guiding force behind the invasions of Iraq, the destabilizations of the Middle East and the Horn of Africa. Like, it's just depressing that things were this obvious, and that the Biden administration just chose to ignore basic things that they could have done better. This isn't entirely like the Biden administration being malicious and stupid, but it's a lot of that. That's the key thing here for U.S. politics. The downside risks of our forever wars and the great power competitions we keep pushing are massive and unpredictable. At this early point in the Biden administration, it can seem easier to just sort of stick with the status quo and not upset too many defense industry apple carts, and not upset too many congresspeople in both parties who are owned by the defense industry. This may seem like the safer approach, but it's really not. There's a lot of time between now and 2024, and there's a very good chance that our constant aggression all over the world will produce another issue that's perfect for Donald Trump. And that's exactly what happened in Gaza and in Ukraine. Obviously, Vladimir Putin is the guy who chose to invade his neighbor, but unlike what most media tells you, we had a program of constant aggression against Russia and Vladimir Putin throughout the Trump administration and the Biden administrations. It was this inability to recalculate at all that led Putin to make the incredibly stupid and evil choice to invade his neighbor. Gaza is much, much more straightforward. Joe Biden's choice to embrace and continue embracing in the face of extraordinary horror, in the face of endless slaughter of women and children for over a year now, Joe Biden's orientation, the U.S. government's and Democratic Party's continued organization towards hyper-aggression, bombing everything, gave Trump the two issues that I believe made the most of the distance towards getting him back into the White House, Gaza and Ukraine. Geez, it's just... I can't believe I almost forgot to mention this. Foreign policy and the Russia-Ukraine conflict in particular are at the heart of the main reason that Joe Biden lost this election for Kamala Harris. That reason is inflation, the fact that everything in the United States got a lot more expensive. A lot of economists will tell you that Joe Biden beat inflation, and that's true. Joe Biden did eventually, by 2024, get to the point where inflation was kind of normal by historic circumstances. That doesn't mean that anything got cheaper. The U.S. voter saw that everything got more expensive in 2021 and 2022 in particular, and it didn't get cheaper. That's the Biden inflation, no matter how good a job Biden and the Fed managed to do in actually taming this inflation. In 2021, it was a story of supply chains being snarled up and debatably also the large Biden stimulus on top of the large Trump stimulus. I don't really understand those economics. I think a lot of people assert really confidently that they understand those economics. But regardless, that is one of the possible reasons behind the Biden inflation. You've got the supply chains, you've got too much government spending. And then in 2022, the Fed started correcting jacked up interest rates, which has also been incredibly painful. And inflation was persistent across 2022. And everybody agrees this isn't like some sort of like faith-based economics thing. Everybody agrees it is because of the Russia-Ukraine war, because petroleum products got massively, massively more expensive, and because you need oil and natural gas for everything, to make everything, to transport everything. That is why the Biden inflation was so persistent and so much worse than it would have been otherwise. Foreign policy killed the Biden administration in this way and in many, many other ways. But there is good news here. One of these things is not like the others. Inequality and racism are perennial problems that will always be with us. What's more, the president has pretty limited powers to deal with these domestic problems. The forever wars? According to the Constitution and most U.S. laws, Biden can wake up and stop them tomorrow. Now, obviously, it's not that easy. Trump showed that by his complete failure to get out of Syria and Afghanistan, two things he seemed to sincerely want to do. But Biden, even if he is somewhat diminished, really does know how government works and has hired at least a few intelligent people who are eager to help him get it done. Trump didn't know anything and almost exclusively hired pro-war people. Biden should end the forever wars and start taking a saner, less militaristic approach to great power competition. It's not just the right thing to do, it's the smartest thing to do for the success of his presidency and his party. It's also the best way to stop Donald Trump. The only thing standing in Biden's way is the U.S. foreign policy establishment. Whether you know it as the blob or the deep state, or as I do, as the metastasized military-industrial complex, I believe that it is the greatest threat to the survival of this country and the world. Well, the metastasized military-industrial complex certainly managed to destroy the Biden administration and destroy the Democrats' hopes of keeping Trump out of office in 2024. Joe Biden, in 2021, in the early months of his presidency, took courageous steps to get us out of Afghanistan. And that metastasized military-industrial complex punished him for it. The U.S. media raked him over the coals for taking the heroic decision to end a single forever war. And the lesson that he took from that, the lesson that he took from his plummeting popularity after the media ripped him to shreds for getting us out of Afghanistan and giving us a little peace, the decision he made was to never again end a forever war. I believe, this is very hard to prove, but I believe that he would have actually been more peace-oriented with Russia in 2021 if he wasn't getting beaten up so badly over Afghanistan. And in fact, there could have been a settlement there. I also believe that after Putin had invaded and experienced like great defeats over the course of 2022, Biden would have been more open to ending that conflict when Ukraine was winning. But no, because our media decided that more aggression is the only possibility. And so here we are at the beginning of a new Trump administration. This past weekend, we've seen a number of moves from the Trump camp that actually, in some ways, seem kind of hopeful. Famous warmongers like Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, and Tom Cotton will not be joining the Trump administration. However, we also learned that Elise Stefanik is going to be Trump's representative at the United Nations. I am not optimistic that we will see any real move away from military aggression over the course of the Trump administration. But I think the irreducible fact is that Joe Biden, and in much smaller part Kamala Harris, utterly failed to stop a new Donald Trump presidency. And even if Donald Trump is somehow miraculously a more pro-peace president, the impact that he's going to have on vulnerable populations within the United States is likely to be outsized and unforgivable. We know that Donald Trump is a bad guy. I think that it's really important to also remember that Joe Biden is a bad guy and an incredible failure, and that the decisions that were made here during the Biden administration are what have contributed to truly what I think will be remembered as the Trump era of U.S. politics. All we have at this point is to hope that Donald Trump does a better job with this office than Donald Trump did last time. It wouldn't be that hard to do a better job than Joe Biden did. If you've enjoyed this series or anything else you've seen on the More Freedom Foundation, I'd be very grateful if you signed up on Patreon. If you sign up for Patreon, you get patrons-only newscasts. You get patrons-only chats on our Discord server. And also, yes, did I mention there is a patrons-only Discord server? Please do sign up, and thanks for being here.